I've been married to Madison for 5 years. She's a lawyer, sharp as hell, and she's always been able to handle any situation with an ease that's almost intimidating. She's the type of person who never cracks under pressure. No kids, just the two of us, living what I thought was a comfortable, successful life. On the surface, everything seemed fine. I work in marketing, and my job keeps me busy, but Madison. She's always working. Always. Nights, weekends, you name it. At first, I admired her dedication. It was part of what made me fall in love with her. But lately, things have felt off. It started with small things, late nights at the office turning into overnight stays because she was prepping for a big case. Or the fact that she stopped wanting to do things together. We used to go out every weekend, grab drinks, explore new places. But now, it's like pulling teeth to get her to spend any time with me that's not in front of her laptop. I tried to brush it off. We've both got demanding jobs, right? Maybe we were just growing apart because we were busy. But the distance felt different this time. It wasn't just us being tired, it was like she wasn't there, mentally or emotionally. I'd talk to her, and she'd nod, but I could tell her mind was somewhere else. And then there was the perfume. Expensive. Not something she usually wears. One night, when she came home late, I smelled it on her. Strong, like she'd just put it on. When I asked about it, she brushed it off with some excuse about a colleague giving her a sample. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I'm starting to wonder. Anyway, that's the backstory. I don't know if I'm reading too much into things, or if there's something deeper going on. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's everything. Madison was slipping away from me. I could feel it in the air between us, this silent gap growing wider every day. She used to text me throughout the day, checking in, sending little jokes or things that made her think of me. But now? Nothing. And when I'd text her, the replies were brief, almost dismissive. I'd ask how her day was going, and I'd get a, busy, I'll tell you later, but later never came. One night, we were sitting in the living room, and I tried to bring it up. I asked her if everything was okay between us, if she was stressed, if there was something we needed to talk about. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in what felt like weeks, and smiled. Her smile felt off. Too perfect, too rehearsed. Like she'd practiced how to act normal. She told me I was overthinking things, that work had been insane and she was just exhausted. She even laughed it off, saying I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining the way she kept checking her phone. I wasn't imagining the long pauses when she'd zone out mid-conversation, like she was a million miles away. And I definitely wasn't imagining the way she kept changing the subject when I tried to talk about us. The thing that really got me, though, was when she started mentioning this new consultant she'd been working with at her firm. Some guy named Eric. She brought him up casually at first, just in passing, like he was another coworker. But then she started talking about him more and more, almost like she wanted to drop his name into every conversation. He's really sharp, she'd say, or, Eric's been a huge help with this case. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I noticed how she'd smile when she said his name. Not a big smile, just this subtle little upturn of her lips, like she was thinking of something, or someone. And yeah, maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was blowing things out of proportion. But my gut was telling me something was off. You can't fake that feeling in your stomach, when you just know something's wrong. I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own marriage, and I couldn't shake the sense that Madison was hiding something from me. I told myself I needed more proof before I confronted her. I didn't want to jump to conclusions and accuse her of something if it was all in my head. But the doubt was eating away at me. How do you even begin to address something like this without making yourself sound crazy? I told myself I wasn't going to push it. I mean, what if I really was just overthinking? Maybe it was just stress, right? We'd both been swamped with work lately, and that could explain the distance. I tried to convince myself that things were fine. But deep down, I knew better. Then, something unexpected happened that completely threw me off. It was a Tuesday evening, and I had come home early from work. Madison was at the office, as usual. I was sitting on the couch, watching some mindless TV, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but for some reason, I picked up. Hello. The voice on the other end was a woman, and she sounded nervous. Hi. Is this Aaron? My heart started racing. Yeah, this is Aaron. Who's this? There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing, like she was trying to figure out how to say what she needed to say. My name's Erica. I don't know how to tell you this, but I think you should know what's going on. What? I sat up straight, suddenly alert. What are you talking about? It's about your wife. Madison. My stomach dropped. The way she said Madison's name, it was like she knew something I didn't, and whatever it wasn't good. What about her? I asked, my voice tight. She hesitated again, and I could feel my whole body tensing up. Look, I work at the clothing store in the city. Madison's been coming in a lot lately. She's been seeing one of the consultants there. What do you mean, seeing one of the consultants? I mean, she sighed, and I could practically hear her bracing herself. I think she's having an affair with him. I just sat there, the phone pressed against my ear, trying to make sense of what she was saying. This stranger, this random woman, was telling me that my wife, was cheating on me with some guy who worked at a clothing store. It didn't make sense. None of it did. I don't believe you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. How do you know? I've seen them together, Erica said, sounding almost apologetic. A few times. He's one of our best consultants. Madison's been spending a lot of time with him, and it's not just about shopping. They've been getting close. Really close. I was shaking now. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Who was this guy? And why hadn't I noticed? Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Because I would want to know, Erica replied softly. If it were me, I'd want someone to tell me. I know it's not my place, but I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I didn't know what to say. My whole world was spinning, and I was trying to hold on to some sense of reality. I'm sorry, she added. I just thought you deserved to know. I hung up the phone without another word and sat there in stunned silence. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was a blur of questions I couldn't answer. Was it true? Could Madison really be doing this? And if she was, why? Why hadn't I seen it? I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to storm down to her office, confront her right then and there. But another part of me was frozen, paralyzed by the fear that this stranger had just ripped open my life and exposed something I wasn't ready to face. It was the most unexpected call of my life, and I had no idea what to do next. After the call, I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was spinning, and the more I thought about it, the more conflicted I felt. A random phone call from some woman at a store. Was that really enough to throw my entire marriage into question? Could I really believe her? I wanted to dismiss it as a lie. I wanted to think that Erica had some kind of personal vendetta or was just mistaken. But her voice, there was something in the way she spoke, like she wasn't out to hurt me, just to give me a heads up. And that's what scared me the most. She sounded sincere. The doubt started creeping in, and I found myself replaying every little thing Madison had done over the last few months. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the random perfume that wasn't hers. And then, of course, there was Eric. Eric. It couldn't be a coincidence that she'd been talking about this guy at work so much lately. Could it? The more I tried to convince myself it was nothing, the harder it got to ignore all the red flags. Maybe I had been blind. Maybe I didn't want to see it because the idea of my wife, my Madison, being unfaithful was too painful to even consider. But now, with that phone call, everything was out in the open, and I had no choice but to face it. I paced around the living room, trying to shake the feeling of betrayal gnawing at my insides. My head kept screaming that this couldn't be happening, that it was all just some misunderstanding. But my gut was telling me a different story. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. What if Erica was wrong? What if she'd misread the situation? The last thing I wanted was to blow up my marriage over something that might not even be real. I decided to wait. I needed more than a stranger's word to accuse my wife of cheating. I needed proof. Something solid that would either confirm my worst fears or put my mind at ease. Until then, I had to play it cool, as if nothing had changed. When Madison came home that night, I tried to act normal. She walked in, looking exhausted as usual, and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. I couldn't help but flinch slightly, wondering if she'd just been with him, this consultant, whoever the hell he was. "How was your day?" she asked casually, like everything was perfectly fine. "Busy," I said, my voice tight. "Yours?" She shrugged. "Same as always. This case is killing me. I'll probably be working late again tomorrow." I nodded, pretending to be absorbed in whatever was on the TV, but inside, I was boiling. I wanted to scream at her, demand the truth, but I didn't. Not yet. She disappeared into the bedroom, and I sat there, wondering how long I could keep pretending that everything was fine. How long I could keep swallowing down the rage and confusion building up inside me. The hardest part. I still loved her. Despite everything, despite the doubts, the possible betrayal, I loved her. And the idea of losing her was tearing me apart. But I knew I couldn't stay in the dark forever. Eventually, the truth would come out. It had to. I just didn't know if I was ready for what I might find. The next day, I woke up feeling hollow. The weight of the phone call from Erica hung over me like a storm cloud, and I couldn't shake it. Madison was already up and out of bed when I got up, her usual early morning routine of leaving before me in full swing. I found her in the kitchen, dressed impeccably for work, sipping coffee like everything was just another day. I couldn't look at her the same way. I watched her from the doorway, trying to read her, searching for any sign of guilt, anything that would give her away. But she was flawless, like always. She smiled when she saw me and leaned in for a quick kiss before grabbing her bag. "I'll be home late again tonight," she said, breezing past me. "Eric and I have to go over the deposition notes." I flinched when she said his name, but she didn't notice, or maybe she did, and she was just that good at pretending. "Yeah, sure," I mumbled, barely able to get the words out. She flashed me another smile and was out the door before I could even think about how to respond. I stood there in the empty kitchen for a few minutes, trying to steady myself. My heart was racing, and I felt like I was losing control of everything. Then, something happened. Something I didn't expect. About an hour later, I was at work, trying to focus but completely distracted by everything that had been happening. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down, expecting another work email. But it wasn't work. It was a text from Madison. The message was short. "Running late. Let's meet up at lunch tomorrow. I love you. Hugs and kisses." I stared at the screen, confused. We hadn't made any plans for lunch, and she almost never texted me while she was at work. That in itself wasn't a big deal, but it was the second message that came through right after. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Same hotel." My blood went cold. The text wasn't meant for me. I stared at the message, heart pounding, stomach sinking. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was some weird autocorrect mistake, maybe it was a prank, but I knew better. This was it. The slip-up. The mistake that confirmed everything. I couldn't think straight. My hands were shaking as I typed out a response. "Who's this for?" It took her a few minutes to reply, but it felt like hours. My heart was pounding in my chest, my thoughts spiraling out of control. When the message came through, my whole body tensed. Oh, that was meant for Eric. "We're meeting with a client at the hotel conference room later today. Sorry, babe, ignore that. Love you." Her response seemed so casual, so normal, like it was nothing to worry about. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I knew my wife, and she was too smart, too careful. The way she handled it, it was too smooth. I couldn't let it go. The doubt, the phone call from Erica, the text, it all lined up. And the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that Madison wasn't just covering up an innocent mistake. She was covering up her tracks. I didn't respond to her text. I couldn't. Instead, I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my mind going over and over everything that had happened. That night, Madison came home late, like she said she would. I was sitting on the couch when she walked in, looking tired but cheerful. She gave me a quick kiss on the forehead before heading into the bedroom to change. I sat there, gripping my phone, still staring at that text. I wanted to confront her right then, demand to know what was really going on. But I didn't. I waited. I needed more than a slip-up text. I needed undeniable proof. Because as much as I hated to admit it, I still didn't want to believe it was true. But deep down, I knew. That night, after Madison fell asleep, I lay awake next to her, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The text, the phone call, all of it circled in my head like vultures. No matter how much I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, the truth was staring me in the face. I just didn't have solid proof yet, and that's what was keeping me from acting. I couldn't confront her without knowing for sure. What if I was wrong? What if it really was a simple misunderstanding? But something told me that wasn't the case. I had ignored the warning signs for too long, and now they were all slamming into me at once. I had to know the truth. The next day, I made a decision. I took off work, told them I was sick, and set out to follow Madison. I felt ridiculous, like some cliché character in a movie. But what else could I do? Sitting around wondering wasn't going to get me anywhere. I needed answers. She had left early that morning, claiming she had another long day of meetings lined up. I let her go, giving her the usual kiss and smile before she headed out the door, but my stomach was in knots the whole time. Once she was gone, I grabbed my keys and left the house, heading in the direction of her office. I parked a couple of blocks away, my heart pounding as I waited. I felt like a fool, sitting there in my car like some private investigator, but I was desperate. After what felt like hours, I saw her walking out of the office. She wasn't alone. Eric was with her. My stomach dropped. I'd never seen him in person before, but I knew right away it was him. He had that confident, polished look that Madison seemed to admire in people, sharp suit, tall, well put together. The kind of guy who probably never heard the word no in his life. I watched as they walked down the street together, talking closely, almost intimately. She laughed at something he said, and the sight of it made my chest tighten. There was something about the way they moved together, the ease in their body language, that set off alarms in my head. I followed them, carefully, trying to keep my distance but close enough that I wouldn't lose them. They turned into a small cafe a few blocks away, one of those cozy, out-of-the-way places Madison and I used to go to. Seeing her there with him, sitting so casually across the table like they didn't have a care in the world, felt like a punch to the gut. They didn't look like colleagues. They looked like something more. Something I couldn't bring myself to fully acknowledge just yet. But I stayed, sitting in my car, watching from across the street as they talked, smiled, leaned in closer. After about an hour, they left. But instead of going back to the office, they walked toward a nearby hotel. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized where they were heading. They went inside, disappearing through the hotel doors without so much as a glance behind them. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my whole body shaking. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't paranoia. Madison wasn't just working late. She was with him. I don't know how long I stayed in that car. I just sat there, numb, trying to process what I had just seen. I knew it then. My wife, my Madison, was having an affair. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not without undeniable proof. I needed something solid, something she couldn't weasel her way out of with lawyer talk and carefully constructed lies. The next step was clear. I had to catch her in the act. That night, Madison came home late again, acting like nothing was wrong. She was cheerful, asked me about my day, and even suggested we go out to dinner over the weekend, like she was trying to make up for something. I played along, forcing a smile, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was already making plans. The next few days, I installed a tracker on her phone, something I'd never imagined I would do, but here I was. I knew her passwords, so it wasn't difficult. I also put a small camera in the house, hidden where she wouldn't notice. I had to be careful, but I was determined to get the truth. I knew it was only a matter of time before I had the evidence I needed. And when that moment came, I would be ready. But until then, I had to live with the constant ache of knowing she was lying to me, every time she smiled, every time she touched me, every time she kissed me goodnight. The waiting was torture. But it would all be worth it when the truth finally came out. The days dragged on like some twisted game of cat and mouse, except I wasn't sure if I was the cat or the mouse. I played the role of the unsuspecting, loving husband perfectly, but every time I saw Madison's face, my stomach churned with anger, confusion, and that gnawing sense of betrayal. Every day felt like a countdown to something bigger, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The camera was in place, the tracker was on her phone, and I was just waiting for the moment she'd slip up, the moment I'd catch her for good. I hated that I had resorted to this, but what choice did I have? One evening, she came home unusually early, and for a second, I panicked. Had she figured it out? Was she on to me? But no, her face didn't show any signs of suspicion, just that same worn-out look she'd been carrying around for weeks, as if she was the one carrying the weight of the world. "Hey, I was thinking we could have dinner together tonight," she said, hanging her coat up by the door. "We haven't had a proper date night in ages." I blinked at her, surprised. After all the late nights, the secrecy, and the distance, now she wanted to act like everything was normal. I didn't know how to respond. Was this her way of easing her guilt? Or was she trying to cover her tracks, throwing me off the scent? "Yeah, sure. Sounds good," I managed to say, forcing a smile. We ended up going to one of our favorite spots, a small Italian place we used to visit when we first started dating. It should have been comforting, familiar, but the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were just playing pretend. She was making conversation, asking about my work, even joking around like she used to, but I felt like I was sitting across from a stranger. Every time she laughed, it felt forced. Every time she reached across the table to touch my hand, I flinched, imagining her touching him the same way. I couldn't even enjoy the meal. The food tasted like ash in my mouth, and the wine wasn't enough to drown out the chaos swirling in my mind. We got home, and Madison seemed genuinely relaxed, like she believed everything was fine between us. She leaned in to kiss me as we stood in the kitchen, and for the first time, I pulled away before she could. She froze, looking at me with confusion, maybe even a hint of fear in her eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft, concerned. I shook my head, forcing a smile. Nothing. Just tired. Long day. She watched me for a moment, her eyes searching mine, but she didn't push. Instead, she gave me a small, tight smile and headed to the bedroom to change. I knew I couldn't keep this up for much longer. The constant pretending, the lies on both sides, it was suffocating me. But I was so close now. I just needed one more piece of evidence to confront her. One more undeniable truth. I checked the tracker that night after she fell asleep. It was there, plain as day. She had been at the hotel earlier that day, the same one she had been meeting Eric at. I didn't need a detective to tell me what was happening there. But what happened the next day caught me completely off guard. Madison was working late again, and I was sitting on the couch, going over everything in my head. I was planning the confrontation in my mind, trying to figure out the right words, the right moment. That's when I got a notification on my phone. The camera I'd set up in our bedroom had been triggered. My heart raced as I opened the app to check the footage. I half expected to see Madison sneaking in with Eric, thinking she had the house to herself. But instead, the camera showed Madison standing by the bed, packing a small suitcase. I watched as she carefully folded her clothes, placing them into the suitcase neatly, like she was preparing for something big. My throat tightened as I realized what was happening. She wasn't just having an affair. She was leaving. I sat there, frozen, watching as she packed more and more of her things. She didn't look upset or frantic, just methodical, like she had planned this. It hit me all at once, she was done. Whatever she had with Eric, it had reached the point where she was ready to walk away from me, from us, without even giving me the courtesy of a goodbye. When she was finished, she left the bedroom, and the camera feed cut out. I couldn't move. The realization that she was going to leave me, after all the years, after everything we'd been through, was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't even the affair that hurt the most in that moment. It was the fact that she was ready to abandon me without a word. I knew then that the confrontation was coming. Whether I was ready or not, everything was about to come crashing down. I just didn't know when. The next day, I knew it was time to stop pretending. Madison's been lying, sneaking around, and packing her bags for someone else. But instead of confronting her right away, I played it cool, waiting for her next move. The suitcase she packed last night was fresh in my mind. She hadn't mentioned it, and I hadn't asked. I was waiting for her to make the first excuse. She was home when I got back from work that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. The same scene as always, papers scattered, her fingers typing away as if she wasn't hiding something huge from me. It made my skin crawl. "Hey," she said casually without looking up. "Dinner plans tonight?" "I have a lot to wrap up. Actually, I've got to leave for a business trip tomorrow, but I should be back in a couple of days." There it was, the excuse. My heart pounded, but I kept my face neutral. "Business trip, huh?" I said, watching her closely. "Yeah," she said, not missing a beat. "I've got a big case coming up, and they're flying me out to meet with a client." I nodded, pretending to buy her story. "Where are you headed?" She hesitated for the briefest moment, then answered, "It's just a quick thing, down in the city. Shouldn't be too long. I'll be back by the weekend." I felt the lie hanging in the air between us, but I didn't push. Instead, I watched her. Watched how easily the lie rolled off her tongue, how she didn't even flinch. "All right," I said, trying to sound casual. "Well, safe travels, I guess." She smiled, looking relieved. "Thanks. I'll text you when I get there." That night, she packed more of her things, business attire, or so she said. I watched her from the doorway as she zipped up the suitcase. I asked if she needed help, but she waved me off, insisting she had it under control. All I could do was nod and play along, knowing that her business trip wasn't anything close to what she claimed. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye, telling me she'd call when she landed. I watched her drive off, my stomach in knots, knowing full well she wasn't headed for any client meeting. As soon as she was gone, I checked the tracker on her phone. Sure enough, she wasn't going to the airport. She was going straight to the hotel, the same one I'd seen in the tracker before. I knew I couldn't sit and wait anymore. I had to see it for myself. I drove to the hotel, my heart racing the whole way. I wasn't even sure what I'd do when I got there, but I needed to know. I couldn't keep living in this fog of suspicion and doubt. When I arrived, I parked a few blocks away and walked into the lobby, my legs feeling like lead. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the front desk, doing my best to remain calm. I gave the clerk Madison's name, and after some typing, she told me what room she was in. Room 509. I took the elevator up, every second feeling like an eternity. By the time I reached her floor, my hands were shaking. I knew what I was about to find, but I still wasn't prepared for it. I stood outside the door for a moment, taking a deep breath before sliding the keycard in. The lock clicked open, and I pushed the door gently. The room was quiet, and for a brief second, I thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe she really was here on business. But then I saw it, the pile of clothes on the floor, hastily discarded, leading a trail to the bed. And there she was. Madison, naked, lying in bed. But she wasn't alone. Eric was there, too, sprawled out beside her, the sheets barely covering them. The world seemed to freeze. I stood in the doorway, watching as the truth I'd been dreading unfolded right in front of me. They didn't even hear me come in. Madison's head was resting on his chest, her eyes closed like she didn't have a care in the world. I don't know what snapped inside me, but I found my voice. Madison. She jolted up, her eyes wide in shock, and when she saw me standing there, all the color drained from her face. Aaron. This isn't what it looks like. But I wasn't hearing it. Not anymore. I had seen exactly what it was. Save it, I said, my voice tight with fury. I've heard enough lies. Eric scrambled to sit up, grabbing for his clothes, stammering some pathetic excuse, but I didn't care about him. All I could see was Madison, and the betrayal etched on every inch of her body. Every excuse she'd made, every lie she'd told, it all led to this moment. I shook my head, backing out of the room. We're done. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving them behind. Leaving her behind. The person I thought I knew was gone, replaced by this stranger who had shattered our life together. As I left the hotel, I realized there was no turning back. This was the moment everything ended. And despite the pain, a part of me felt strangely free. After that night at the hotel, everything changed. I walked out of that room with the weight of our 5-year marriage crumbling behind me. Madison tried calling me, texting me, but I ignored every single one. I couldn't stomach the thought of hearing more lies. A few days passed, and as expected, she showed up at the house, looking disheveled, her usual polished self gone. She begged for a conversation, for a chance to explain. But I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. Enter Natalie, Madison's best friend. Natalie and I had always gotten along, but I never thought much of it. She was smart, funny, and had a way of seeing right through people, something that made her and Madison click so well. After finding out about the affair, I guess I was looking for comfort in familiar places, someone who understood the depth of the betrayal. Natalie had heard about what happened. Madison had confided in her, thinking she could rely on her friend to help her pick up the pieces. But Natalie wasn't the type to cover for people, not when she knew they were in the wrong. One evening, she called me, asking if I needed to talk. I figured, why not? I didn't have much to lose anymore. We met up for drinks at a bar across town. At first it was just the usual, her comforting me, me venting about how everything had fallen apart. But there was something different about Natalie that night. The way she looked at me, the way she listened, really listened, to everything I said. It felt real. Genuine. She wasn't feeding me pity or empty words. She just got it. One drink turned into two, two turned into three, and before I knew it, we were back at my place. At first, it was just physical, a way for me to numb the pain and feel something other than anger. I thought it was just going to be a one-night stand, a rebound. Maybe I was even doing it to get back at Madison, to hurt her the way she hurt me. But as the days went by, I found myself drawn to Natalie in a way I hadn't expected. What started as spite began to feel like something more. She wasn't just Madison's best friend anymore, she was someone I wanted to be around. We started seeing each other more regularly, and the connection grew deeper. I didn't plan for it to turn into something real, but it did. Then came the day Madison found out. It was about 2 weeks after the hotel incident, and I hadn't spoken to her much. She'd been trying to reach out, but I made it clear I didn't want to talk. She must have sensed something was up because she showed up at the house unannounced, just as Natalie was leaving. I'll never forget the look on Madison's face when she saw us together, me standing there with Natalie, her best friend, looking so comfortable, so close. It was like her whole world shattered in that moment. She didn't even try to hide her shock. "Aaron." "Natalie?" Her voice cracked as she took in the scene. I stood there, not saying a word, while Natalie stood by my side, her presence strong, unwavering. I could see the panic in Madison's eyes as the realization hit her. She started shaking, her hands trembling as she looked between the two of us. "No, no, this can't be happening," Madison whispered, her voice barely audible. And then, something I didn't expect, she dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Aaron, please," she sobbed, crawling toward me, grabbing at the hem of my jeans like she was holding on to the last shred of hope. "Please don't do this. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. I can't lose you. I'll do anything, just, please, don't leave me." I looked down at her, and for a second, I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered everything, how I'd found her naked in bed with Eric, how she had lied, time and time again. And suddenly, I didn't feel bad at all. "You should have thought about that before," I said coldly, stepping back. "You didn't care when you were sneaking around with him. Why should I care now?" She cried harder, her hands reaching out for me, her voice breaking. "Please, Aaron, don't kick me out. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy, we'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes." That's when Natalie stepped forward, standing beside me, strong and calm. She didn't say anything, but her presence spoke volumes. Madison's eyes widened as she looked up at her, the betrayal sinking in. It wasn't just that I had moved on, it was that I had moved on with her best friend. "How could you?" Madison sobbed, her voice filled with both disbelief and anguish. "Natalie, how could you do this to me? You were my friend." Natalie crossed her arms, looking down at Madison without a hint of guilt. "Maybe I stopped being your friend when I realized how little you valued your marriage. You didn't just betray Aaron, you betrayed me too." Madison crumpled, her sobs growing louder as she realized she had lost everything. She kept pleading, kept trying to convince me that she could change, that we could go back to the way things were. But as I stood there, with Natalie by my side, I knew that wasn't possible. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. This wasn't about getting back at Madison for what she did. My relationship with Natalie had become something real, something I hadn't expected but wasn't willing to let go of. I leaned down, my voice steady. "Madison, it's over. You need to leave." She looked up at me, her face wet with tears, her hands shaking. "Please, please, Aaron." But I didn't waver. "You made your choice. Now, it's time for you to live with it." I turned away, and Natalie followed me inside, leaving Madison on her knees, crying in the doorway. As the door closed behind us, I felt a strange sense of closure wash over me. Madison was my past. Natalie, unexpectedly, was becoming my future. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had taken control of my life again. After everything with Madison, my life took a turn I never expected. Natalie and I grew closer, and what had started as a relationship born out of pain and revenge quickly blossomed into something real, something deep. There was an ease with Natalie that I hadn't felt in years, a feeling of being understood, seen, and valued for who I was, not just what I could provide. Months passed, and we moved in together, building a life that was far from the wreckage Madison had left behind. It felt surreal at first, like waking up from a nightmare and finding yourself in a dream you didn't know you could have. We laughed more, talked more, and shared parts of ourselves that had been locked away for too long. Then, one evening, after a quiet dinner at home, Natalie smiled at me in that way she always does when she's about to say something big. "Aaron," she said softly, reaching for my hand. "I'm pregnant." I froze, staring at her, waiting for the words to sink in. Pregnant? A baby? My heart raced, but not in the anxious, fearful way I had felt with Madison. This was different. This was joy. Natalie was going to be the mother of my child, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could see a future, a real future, not one clouded with doubt and betrayal. "I'm going to be a dad?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded, her eyes filled with happy tears. "You're going to be a dad." I pulled her into my arms, hugging her tightly as the reality of it all hit me. This was everything I had been searching for, and more. I never imagined that after everything, I would find happiness like this. We were going to have a family, a fresh start, free from the lies and pain of the past. As for Madison, her life had taken a much different path. After the affair was exposed, it didn't take long for her professional world to crumble, too. Word got around about her office romance with Eric, and apparently, it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. One affair after another had been quietly swept under the rug, but this time, there was no more hiding. She was fired within weeks. Her reputation, once so pristine, was in shambles. Eric, of course, didn't stick around. Once the scandal broke and Madison lost her job, he distanced himself. He was never in it for the long haul, just a fling, a distraction. Madison had sacrificed everything, our marriage, her career, her friendships, for a man who didn't even care enough to stay. She was left with nothing. At first, she came crawling back, begging for forgiveness, pleading for another chance. She showed up at our door more than once, tears in her eyes, desperate to turn back time and undo the damage she had caused. "I've lost everything, Aaron," she would say, her voice breaking. "I was wrong, I know that now. Please, please just give me another chance. I can't live like this." But each time, I refused. I couldn't go back to that dark place, not when I had found something so much better. Natalie stood by me, her quiet strength always a reminder that I had made the right choice. Madison would cry, try to manipulate the situation, but it didn't work. She had burned every bridge, and there was no coming back. The final straw came when she found out about the baby. We hadn't made a big announcement, but word got out. One day, Madison showed up at our house again, this time, completely unhinged. I could see it in her eyes the moment she stepped onto the porch. "You're having a baby," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "With her?" Natalie stood beside me, calm but protective. She didn't say a word, just held her ground. I could feel the tension in the air, the jealousy radiating off Madison like heat. She wasn't just angry, she was furious. Seeing me with Natalie, happy, starting a family, had pushed her over the edge. "How could you?" Madison screamed, her face red with rage. "How could you just replace me like this?" I loved you, Aaron. I made a mistake, but we could have fixed it. We could have had a family. Madison, you need to leave, I said firmly, stepping in front of Natalie. We're done. You've been done with me for a long time, and now I've moved on. I'm happy, and we're going to have a child. It's time for you to accept that. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, her voice trembling. You don't understand. I have nothing left. You were my last chance, Aaron. I need you. No, I said, my voice steady. You need to move on. At that moment, Madison seemed to realize that she had truly lost everything. She stared at me, then at Natalie, who stood strong and unshaken, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Madison's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw her completely defeated. How could you do this to me, she whispered, her voice hoarse. How could you just replace me, like I was nothing? But I wasn't going to let her guilt me into anything anymore. Madison had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Without another word, she turned and left, her shoulders slumped, her sobs echoing down the street. As the door closed behind her, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She was finally gone. She wouldn't be coming back. And now, Natalie and I could move forward, free of the past, ready to start the next chapter of our lives together. With Natalie by my side, and a baby on the way, I had everything I needed. Madison was my past, but Natalie and our child, they were my future. And for the first time in years, I felt whole.